Arrogant cadets mocked the 83-year-old janitor, kicking over his bucket for fun. They saw a weak old man. They didn't know he was a decorated war hero. And the base commander was about to reveal his name. At 0400 hours, while Peterson Air Force Base slumbered, Frank Miller began his day. At 83, his body was a repository of aches and memories, but his routine was as crisp and unyielding as it had been a half-century ago. He moved through the pre-dawn quiet of the cadet training wing, his gray mop bucket gliding silently across the polished linoleum floors. To the few early risers who might catch a glimpse of him, he was just Frank, the old janitor, a fixture as unremarkable as the bulletin boards he wiped clean. His uniform was a simple set of navy blue coveralls, with "Frank" stitched in white thread above the breast pocket. No ribbons, no rank, no hint of the life he had lived before. That was how he wanted it. Simple. Quiet. Invisible. His real uniform, the one that defined him, was locked away in a cedar box at home. The Air Force dress blues of a full colonel, adorned with a silver star, a distinguished flying cross, and the campaign ribbons of 2 brutal tours in Vietnam. He had flown F-4 Phantoms through skies thick with anti-aircraft fire, had brought his wingmen home through impossible odds, had buried friends and carried their ghosts for decades. After 28 years of service, he had retired. After his wife, Maria, passed away, the silence of their home became too loud. So he had come back here, to the familiar sounds and smells of military life, not as a commander, but as a custodian. The work was honest, it gave his days structure, and it allowed him to serve again, in his own quiet way. The trouble started on a Tuesday. As Frank was meticulously cleaning the hallway outside the cadet dormitories, a group of young cadets, future officers of the United States Air Force, swaggered by. Their voices were loud, their laughter careless. The leader, a tall, handsome cadet named Evans with an unearned air of superiority, noticed Frank working. "Hey, old man," Evans called out, a smirk playing on his lips. He pointed to a perfectly clean section of the floor. "You missed a spot. Right by my boots." His friends snickered. It was a classic, petty display of power, the kind a bully uses to test the waters. Frank, who had faced down enemy MiGs over Hanoi, simply looked up, gave a slight, patient nod, and moved his mop over the already pristine area. He had learned long ago that some battles were won by refusing to fight. But his quiet compliance only seemed to enrage Evans, who craved a reaction. As Frank continued his work, his back to them, Evans deliberately kicked over the gray mop bucket. Soapy, dirty water sloshed across the floor, soaking Frank's worn work boots. "Oops," Evans said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "Sorry about that, old-timer. Guess you'll have to clean that up, too. Maybe try to do it right this time." The group erupted in laughter as they walked away, leaving Frank standing in a puddle of dirty water, his hands gripping the mop handle so tight his knuckles went white. He didn't feel anger. Not exactly. It was a deep, profound sadness that settled in his bones like a winter chill. He thought of the young men he had flown with, boys of 19 and 20 who had faced death with courage and honor. He looked at the spilled water, at the smirking faces disappearing down the hall, and felt a grief for something more than just himself. He bent down, his old knees creaking, and began to soak up the mess. The kick of the bucket was not an isolated incident, it was an opening salvo. For Cadet Evans and his clique, tormenting the old janitor became a sport, a way to alleviate the boredom of their rigorous training schedule. They would track mud through hallways Frank had just polished, accidentally spill sodas in the break rooms he was responsible for, and make loud, pointed comments about lazy old-timers living off the government, whenever he was within earshot. Frank said nothing. He cleaned up their messes, emptied their overflowing trash cans, and met their casual cruelty with a wall of dignified silence. His stoicism, however, was not shared by everyone. Senior Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a man whose crisp uniform and sharp demeanor commanded respect, ran the cadet training program. He was a veteran of Afghanistan, and he recognized in Frank's bearing a quiet strength that deserved reverence, not ridicule. He began to notice the pattern of harassment. He saw the deliberate spills, heard the mocking comments. It made him sick. He knew that the character of an officer was not forged in flight simulators or academic tests, but in how they treated those they perceived as being beneath them. One afternoon, Rodriguez cornered Cadet Evans and his two closest friends in an empty classroom. "Your behavior is a disgrace to that uniform you're not yet worthy to wear," Rodriguez said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "Mr. Miller is a civilian employee of this base, and he will be treated with respect. Is that understood, gentlemen?" The cadets snapped to a mock attention, their faces a mask of feigned sincerity. "Yes, Sergeant," Evans replied, his eyes gleaming with insolence. "Perfectly understood." But the bullying didn't stop. It just became more subtle. The next day, Frank found his supply cart overturned, its contents scattered across the floor. It was made to look like an accident, but he knew better. The final straw came on a Friday afternoon. Frank was cleaning the main assembly hall, preparing it for a major base-wide ceremony the next morning. Evans and his friends came through, and this time, they weren't content with just words or messes. They began throwing wadded-up balls of paper at him, laughing as the old man bent down with a weary sigh to pick them up. Emboldened, Evans walked up to Frank's cart and, with a deliberate shove, sent it crashing to the floor. Bottles of cleaning chemicals shattered, the sharp, acrid smell filling the vast, empty hall. "That's what happens when you don't pay attention, old man," Evans sneered. From the doorway, Sergeant Rodriguez witnessed the entire exchange. He saw the crash, heard the laughter, and saw the look on Frank's face. For just a moment, the janitor's mask of quiet deference slipped. The old man straightened his back, and his eyes, which were usually downcast, lifted to meet Evans's. For a split second, Rodriguez saw not a janitor, but a commander. He saw a flash of steel, of cold, controlled fury that made the air in the room crackle. The cadets, too busy laughing, missed it entirely. But Rodriguez saw it. And in that moment, he knew this could not be handled at his level. This was no longer a matter of discipline, it was a matter of honor. That evening, he typed a detailed report of every incident he had witnessed and sent it directly to the one person on base he knew would understand, the base commander. General Patricia Hayes, the commander of Peterson Air Force Base, read Sergeant Rodriguez's report in her office, a thunderous silence descending around her. She was a no-nonsense woman who had earned her 2 stars through sheer merit and grit. She had clawed her way up through a male-dominated Air Force, and she had zero tolerance for bullies, especially those who believed their rank or status gave them the right to abuse others. The report detailed the cadets' escalating cruelty, culminating in the public humiliation of an elderly civilian employee. It filled her with a cold, righteous fury. "Get me the civilian personnel file for a Frank Miller," she commanded her aide over the intercom. "And get me everything you can on Cadet Evans and his little friends." Minutes later, the files were on her desk. She opened Frank Miller's first. It was thin. It listed his start date, his social security number, his next of kin, his late wife, Maria. But clipped to the back, as per standard procedure for all base employees, was a copy of his DD-214, his official military discharge record. General Hayes froze. Her eyes scanned the document, her breath catching in her throat. She read it once, then twice, her disbelief turning to awe, and then to a rage so profound it made her hands tremble. She picked up her phone. "Sergeant Rodriguez," she said when he answered. "Did you know who you were defending?" The story contained in that file was the stuff of Air Force legend. Colonel Frank Miller. 28 years of honorable service. 2 tours in Vietnam, flying the F-4 Phantom II. The Distinguished Flying Cross, awarded for navigating his heavily damaged aircraft back to base after being hit by enemy fire, saving his co-pilot. And the Silver Star. The general's mind flashed back, the dry text of the citation blooming into vivid imagery. The mission, a high-risk reconnaissance flight over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Then Captain Miller's wingman was hit by a surface-to-air missile, his plane spiraling downwards. Against direct orders to return to base, Miller had engaged 3 enemy MiG fighters, single-handedly drawing their fire and giving his wingman's rescue helicopter the precious minutes it needed to extract the downed pilot. He had flown his own F-4, now critically low on fuel and riddled with bullets, back across the border on 1 engine and a prayer. He had faced down 3 enemy jets to save 1 American life. And now, Cadet Evans, a boy who had never faced anything more dangerous than a flight simulator, had been throwing paper balls at him. The irony was so bitter it tasted like poison. General Hayes understood everything now. Frank's silence, his humility, his refusal to be baited. It wasn't weakness. It was the profound, unshakable strength of a man who had seen real war and had nothing left to prove. A plan began to form in her mind. A simple disciplinary hearing for the cadets was not enough. An apology was not enough. This was a cancer in her command, an arrogance that needed to be surgically and publicly removed. The base-wide ceremony was tomorrow morning. It was the perfect stage. She would not just punish the guilty. She would re-educate her entire command on the true meaning of honor. She would give Colonel Frank Miller the recognition he had been denied for decades, whether he wanted it or not. Saturday morning arrived, crisp and clear. The main assembly hall was packed with cadets in their dress uniforms, officers, and distinguished visitors. Frank Miller, as instructed, was working in the background, ensuring everything was perfect, remaining, as always, invisible. He stood near the rear exit, leaning on his mop, his mind a million miles away. He had no idea he was the subject of the storm that was about to break. The ceremony proceeded as planned, speeches, awards, patriotic music. Then, General Patricia Hayes stepped to the podium. A hush fell over the hall. Her presence commanded it. "Good morning," she began, her voice carrying across the silent space. "Today, we are here to celebrate excellence, to recognize the future leaders of the United States Air Force." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the rows of young, eager cadets. "But before we conclude, I want to talk about a different kind of service. I want to talk about respect." Her tone shifted, a new, hard edge entering her voice. The cadets, including Evans and his friends, sat up a little straighter. "It has come to my attention," the general continued, her eyes zeroing in on the cadet wing, "that some among us have forgotten the meaning of that word. They have forgotten that the uniform they wear is a symbol of a sacred trust. They have forgotten that leadership is not about asserting dominance over those you perceive as weak, but about lifting them up." A nervous murmur rippled through the cadets section. Evans and his friends exchanged uneasy glances. Cadets Evans, Peterson, and Hayes, the general's voice boomed, using a different Hayes, a cruel irony. "On your feet." The 3 young men scrambled to their feet, their faces flushing red. The entire hall now stared at them. This was the beginning of the psychological operation. They were isolated, exposed, and utterly confused. "For the past several weeks," General Hayes said, her voice like ice, "these cadets have engaged in a campaign of harassment and disrespect against a civilian member of our base staff. A man who cleans the floors you walk on, who empties the trash you leave behind. They mocked him. They made his job harder. They threw trash at him. They did this because they saw him as an old, powerless man. They believed he was beneath them." She let the condemnation hang in the air, a public shaming that was excruciating in its quiet intensity. The 3 cadets stood rigid, their eyes fixed on the floor, the weight of 1,000 stares pressing down on them. They were learning their first real lesson in accountability. But the general was not finished. The true lesson, the one that would be seared into their memories forever, was yet to come. Having laid the foundation of their shame, General Hayes prepared for the final, devastating reveal. Her voice, which had been cold and angry, now took on a tone of profound, almost reverent respect. "What these cadets failed to understand," she said, her gaze still locked on the three trembling young men, is that honor is not always visible. It is not always announced with medals and parades. Sometimes, it walks quietly among us, dressed in the humble uniform of ordinary work. She paused, letting the entire auditorium lean in, hanging on her every word. The tension was unbearable. Frank, still standing by the back wall, felt a growing sense of unease. He didn't understand what was happening, but he felt the atmosphere shift, the focus of the room beginning to turn like a giant, unseen searchlight. Then, the general's voice rang out, clear and powerful, a command that shattered 40 years of Frank's carefully constructed anonymity. "Colonel Frank Miller," she called out. "Please come forward." The hall went dead silent. 1,000 heads turned, scanning the rows of decorated officers, looking for a distinguished guest they had somehow missed. No one moved. The cadets on stage looked utterly bewildered. Evans shot a panicked look at his friends. "Colonel Frank Miller," the general repeated, her voice softer now, but her eyes turning toward the back of the hall. "That's an order." And then it happened. From the shadows near the exit, the old janitor, Frank Miller, slowly placed his mop against the wall. He straightened his back, not just to its full height, but to a ramrod-straight posture no one on the base had ever seen him assume. He began to walk forward, his worn work boots echoing in the cavernous silence. A wave of disbelief and dawning comprehension washed over the hall. Whispers erupted like wildfire. "Is that Frank? The janitor? Colonel?" Every head turned, every eye followed the slow, dignified walk of the old man in the navy blue coveralls as he made his way toward the stage. The cadets who had tormented him looked like they had seen a ghost. Evans's face was ashen, his mouth hanging open, his arrogant smirk replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated horror. He finally understood. The man he had called old-timer, the man whose bucket he had kicked, the man he had treated like dirt, was a full colonel. Frank reached the front of the hall and stood at the base of the stage. He looked up at General Hayes and, with a precision that had not faded with time, he executed a perfect salute. The general returned it, a look of profound respect on her face. She turned back to the microphone, her voice thundering with righteous authority. "For the education of these cadets, and for the honor of this base, let me tell you who this man is." She proceeded to read from the file on her podium, her voice ringing with pride. "Colonel Frank Miller. 28 years of distinguished service, United States Air Force. 2 tours of duty in Vietnam. Recipient of the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary heroism in aerial flight." She paused, her eyes finding Evans in the line. "He is also the recipient of the Silver Star, awarded for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States, an action in which he risked his own life to save his downed wingman." With every word, the cadets seemed to shrink, their faces a mixture of shame, awe, and terror. The standing ovation that erupted from the rest of the hall was deafening. Officers and enlisted personnel alike were on their feet, their applause a roaring tribute to the silent hero who had walked among them, unseen. When the applause finally subsided, General Hayes was not finished. "Cadets," she commanded, her voice like granite. "Face this officer." The 3 young men turned, their movements stiff and robotic, to face Frank. "You will address him by his proper rank," the general ordered. "And you will apologize. Not just for your behavior, but for your profound failure to recognize the honor that stood before you every single day." One by one, they faced him. The lead cadet, Evans, could barely get the words out, his voice a choked whisper. "Sir. Colonel, sir. I am sorry, sir. I had no right. I disrespected you, and I am deeply ashamed." Frank looked at each young, humbled face. He saw their shame, their confusion, their dawning understanding. When the apologies were finished, he spoke, his voice steady and strong, carrying across the silent hall. "You didn't know because I didn't tell you," he said. "But respect isn't about knowing someone's rank, or their history. It's about treating every person with dignity. Because they are human beings. Because they are doing their job. That is all. He turned, saluted the general one last time, and began to walk off the stage. The ceremony ended with a second standing ovation, this one even longer and louder than the first. The invisible janitor had finally been seen. Frank Miller intended to go back to his duties the following Monday, but everything was different. When he entered the cadet wing, the young men and women who had once walked past him without a glance now snapped to attention, their greetings of, "Good morning, sir," and "Morning, Colonel," echoing in the hallways. The cadets who had tormented him were facing severe disciplinary action, their dreams of a smooth career path shattered by their own arrogance. They were assigned to assist Frank with his duties for a month, a humbling lesson in the dignity of the very work they had once mocked. Frank, with his quiet grace, treated them not with anger, but with a firm, paternal guidance. He didn't speak of war or medals. He spoke of the importance of a job well done, of taking pride in one's work, no matter how humble. He taught them more about leadership in those weeks with a mop and a bucket than they had learned in a year of classes. General Hayes had offered him his full retirement benefits, urging him to rest. Frank politely declined. "With respect, General," he had said, "this work gives me purpose." He did, however, accept another offer. He became a volunteer mentor for the base's new cadet character and leadership program. Once a week, the old colonel, still dressed in his simple janitor's coveralls, would sit with a group of young, future officers. He wouldn't tell war stories. He would tell stories about Maria, about the importance of integrity, about the quiet honor of a life lived in service to others, whether in the cockpit of a fighter jet or behind a cleaning cart. He had found a new way to serve, a new mission. He was no longer just guarding the past, he was shaping the future. And in the respectful, attentive eyes of the young cadets, Frank Miller, the man who had just wanted to be invisible, finally found his true and lasting honor. This story is a powerful lesson that true honor is not about the uniform you wear or the rank on your collar, but about the character you possess. It's a reminder to look past a person's job or station in life, and to treat everyone with the dignity they deserve. What does respect mean to you? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story of humility and honor moved you, please like this video, subscribe for more powerful stories, and share it with someone who embodies quiet strength. And comment "respect" to show your support.